You're listening to the Rewilding Earth podcast. The Rewilding Earth podcast is supported by businesses such as Patagonia and Catula, the Whedon Foundation, and listeners like you. If you love the work Rewilding is doing, please consider donating at rewilding.org. And be sure to subscribe to the podcast while you're there. Tim McNulty is a poet, essayist, and nature writer based on Washington's Olympic Peninsula. He is the author of 10 poetry books and 11 books of natural history. Tim's book, Olympic National Park, A Natural History, is a captivating and detailed accounting of the park's 1,400 square miles of rugged mountains, richly forested river valleys, and pristine wilderness coastline. In 2011, Tim and hundreds of activists, organizers, and scientists rejoiced as the largest dam removal in U.S. history began on the Elwha River, which runs through the Olympic National Park to the coast. It marked the end of a decades-long battle to return the Elwha to natural flow, resulting in the return of salmon, eagles, and countless natural processes and species reliant on a healthy river freed from 2 dams. Though a great many people worked on this campaign, several of whom never got to see the fruits of their labor, Tim is the perfect spokesperson to talk about this very big rewilding victory and what it has done locally, as well as what it means in the fight to remove destructive and outmoded dams across the U.S. Tim, thank you so much for being on Rewilding Earth. I am so excited to talk to you because the Olympic Peninsula is one of my favorite places in the world. I fantasize about going there much more than I unfortunately do. So thank you so much for being here.
Well, it's my pleasure to join you.
You know everything about one of my favorite places, the Olympic Peninsula. Yeah, as you've written the definitive natural history of Olympic National Park, but give us a little bit more background on you and how you came to be such a champion for this beautiful region.
Well, sure. I'm originally from New England, but I always had a fascination with the West. During college, took a summer hitchhiking trip out west and visited a number of wild areas and decided that when I finished school, this is where I wanted to be. So took a longer trip out and traveled through the Rockies and up the coast into British Columbia. And the place that struck me as the most beautiful, the wildest, the place I could see myself settling for a long time was the Olympic Peninsula. So around about 1972, I came here to live, and of course had to figure out a way to make a living. My degree in English didn't get me too far, so I ended up working.
Come on, that is the most. You had the whole world laid out in front of you. A degree in English. That's almost as good as a degree in the arts.
Well, it could have been, yeah, almost in philosophy. Yeah, so I ended up working, working in the forest world. I planted trees. We got a little cooperative company together and did that. I did pre-commercial and commercial thinning in the forest, a little logging. I worked several seasons on trails up in the Olympic Mountains, all the while working on some conservation issues, and also all the while trying to, get my writing licks and experiences and some publications leading up to when I was able to kind of break loose from all that, which came at about the right time, and then focused on freelance writing.
One of the things that's really exciting about the news coming out of Olympic and that region is the Elwha and the dams. I mean, we conservationists tend to fantasize about the crumbling demise of thousands of dams all across North America, but it's left mainly to the imagination. You guys, on the other hand, have done some incredible stuff. I'm sure you were right at the center of all of that and know a great deal. But start with giving us a little bit of background on the Elwha itself, and then let's talk about the dams. To be there on the ground is the thing that I and so many people missed. Watching those places come back.
Okay, sure, love to. Well, the Elwha it's just a magnificent river and watershed. It's the largest watershed in Olympic National Park, which I think everyone knows is a mountain, forest, river, and coastal wild area in the northwest corner of Washington State. As I say, a vast watershed, 175,000 acres. And for many years, it was the perhaps the most productive salmon stream on the Olympic Peninsula. It's estimated that about 400,000 fish a year would make the journey up the Elwha River, including all 5 Pacific salmon, as well as steelhead and char, cutthroat trout. It was the center of the Lower Elwha tribal peoples, culture and sustenance. And Around about 1938, most of the Elwha River was included in Olympic National Park. Much later, 1988, 95% of the park was designated a wilderness area. So way back before the park was created in 1913 and 1927, 2 dams were built pretty much illegally on the Elwha River. State law at the time, in fact, the oldest state law in Washington, required fish passage on any fish-bearing stream, and these 2 dams were constructed without fish passage, blocking off all but the lower 5 miles of the Elwha River. The power was, destined for one large mill in Port Angeles. Port Angeles mainly being a timber town at that time and a mill town. And, not much credence was given to the tribe's concerns about what was happening to their fish or to the state law about making dams passable to salmon. And that was the situation for pretty much close to the next century.
Just because they were there, it just made it hard to remove, even if they were put there illegally.
Yeah, that's the case, and it was the basis for the largest employer in town. It was initially it brought power to Port Angeles before the Bonneville Power Administration lines came this far north. And it wasn't until really the relicensing of the upper dam in the 1970s that people began to see that maybe there was a possibility that something could be done, first looking at restoring the fishery, and then eventually, pursuant to some studies looking at how the dam, how fish coming back down the river over the dam would not survive, realizing that in order to restore the fisheries, which was legally required, the dams needed to be removed. And that was a tough one. That was a tough issue to bring up. The Elwha tribe has been incredible in terms of their vision and their leadership. As early as 1968, requesting that the relicensing process ensure full restoration of this magnificent run of salmon up the Elwha River. And then when the relicensing process began under FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, the tribe was one of the key players in advocating for salmon restoration. That kind of carried through into the 1980s. At that time, a young reporter for one of the Seattle papers, Bruce Brown, started looking into the fate of wild salmon in the Northwest, and the Elwha story really caught his attention. He's the one that went back and looked through the state archives and saw the compromises and really, illegal actions that made that dam a fait accompli, and started kind of raising the issue that, these dams really need to come out. One of them was in a national park. One of them was just downstream from a national park, blocking, salmon runs into what amounted to 70 miles of pristine salmon spawning areas upstream of both dams. And by pristine, I mean National Park Service, old growth forest, protected, wilderness, the dream of restoring a salmon stream. And that's when I first kind of became interested in the issue, or even aware.
So it's been that many decades that people had the first idea that they wanted to be rid of those dams, that it was even possible, maybe there was an inkling of an idea that we could be rid of those dams, that those could be returned to nature, returned to their original
that the
source.
idea, right, that the idea first surfaced.
That's a
was
long
for
time to wish for
That's a
something. That's an
long time.
incredibly long. How many people must have been involved in public hearings and letter writing campaigns and lobbying and over all that amazing amount of time, and maybe this is heartening, pulling out a little bit 30,000-foot view of the whole dam situation in the United States.
Yeah.
We can't afford a fight to take that long. And do you think that the Elwha situation has made it easier now that we kind of broke a bigger dam right there? We've kind of cracked a bigger dam, which is the resistance to taking out outmoded, silted in, no longer useful, at least, dams, because now that we have you guys as an example?
I think so, and it's certainly my hope. And the Elwha just had so many things going for it as a river that could be restored. I mean, the historic record going back to the early exploration period when Manuel Quimper, I think 1790, purchased some 100-pound Chinook salmon from the Indians, Elwha people at the mouth of the river. The historic record shows that really a legendary salmon population using the Elwha. The fact that it was a national park and so much of that area was just ready for fish to go up and spawn again. The legality question and then the popular movement, which began in the 80s when not only the Elwha tribe intervened in the FERC proceedings to restore the fishery and ultimately remove the dams, but several environmental organizations, one of which I was an officer in at the time, also intervened. And I think along with the tribe, the organizations, which included Friends of the Earth, Sierra Club, Seattle Audubon, which had a larger national reach, I should say, were able to begin to popularize this cause and tell the story in a larger way, in a more dramatic way, that began to build political pressure for restoring the river, for getting rid of these dams.
I don't know, after such a long period, how one really lets it sink in what happened when those dams were removed. When did it hit you? I can imagine people standing around just at one point or another, especially the ones who have worked on this for decades, just letting go of something that's been pent up for all of that time, which is really an apt way of putting it, I guess, when we're talking about dams and releasing not only the water and the silt and everything that was built up behind them, but all of that energy that had gone into what you guys did. I mean, how did it feel?
Well, the feeling was incredible, but as you say, it happened over a very long period of time. I mean, it's pretty much my lifetime as an environmental activist from my earliest years getting involved in this stuff to seeing this finally come to fruition. Just the final the removal finished in 2014. My beard went gray in the interim, and many people who worked very hard on this were no longer alive to see it happen. It really was almost a generational effort. As I mentioned, the interventions went back to the mid 80s. In the late 80s, a lawsuit was brought to bear on the corporation that ran the dams, as well as the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. The charge was that they were not legally allowed to relicense a dam in a national park, and there was great legal precedent on that. And that kind of changed the conversation. All of a sudden, the company saw that they would not only maybe lose the dams, not be able to relicense them, but have to pay for their removal, and also have to pay for 80 or 90 years of lost salmon runs for the tribe and the state. So, with that, when that lawsuit was introduced, I think it really was a game changer. And all of a sudden, the company was on board. They wanted to talk about how they could guarantee power coming from the BPA to replace the power from the dam, and that the conservation community agreed that BPA power at the cost, subsidized at the cost of what the company was paying for the power from these old dams, would be a reasonable way to keep the mill viable. The city of Port Angeles had concerns about their water quality, the dam removal. They had a big well out there. So all these things kind of built up to 1992, still a while ago, when legislation was passed, the Elwha Restoration Act, that allowed the government to purchase the dams and remove them if need be to restore the salmon fishery on the Elwha. And we celebrated wildly at that point, mission accomplished. And yet it was quite a while after that we finally got to see the dams come out, and that is a whole separate story of the political machinations, local opposition, reaching across, in a bipartisan way, finding ways to, address concerns from people in the community, and fighting some people in Congress that were afraid of just what you've been talking about, that this would be the first in a series of dominoes of dams going down nationwide, and that the Snake River dams were something that was very much on everybody's mind in that regard.
It might be a bit of a romantic notion, but I think 20, 30 years from now, people will start referring to this period and this particular, among many other things, as the beginning of the rewilding period for the planet.
I think so too. I think you're right. I really do.
That's it. Because to see pictures, like I'm right now on Google Images and I'm looking at the pictures of the dams and the various process of being drawn down and destroyed and the water coming through, and we haven't seen anything like this on this planet before. This is a human history moment where, previous to this, we were building the hell out of dams, and we were building all of the, we were lamenting the public works projects because of our employment situation over all the last several decades. It's like, we don't have any big things to put people to work to do. We've dammed all the rivers. We've done all of this stuff. And then you start to go forward. Really, it was a very long time for you, but if you just knock it forward a little bit, you're starting to see different pictures come up, the dams being torn down and things being put back into their place. And I just feel like if we fast forward a few decades, we're going to be talking about this as one of the crown jewels of when this whole thing began, this rewilding movement on the ground with really, really big projects. And there's even bigger projects to come. Much, much bigger, actually. But I don't know. I just feel like this has so much to teach us, wherever we are. And wherever you are listening to this, there's probably a dam in your area that is old, a relic. Nobody knows what to do with it. People have probably forgotten about it because it's almost just a bump in the river now sometimes. Those little check dam things. Right. But you guys kind of are helping to develop, or have helped definitely to help to develop a roadmap for how these things can be accomplished. Maybe if you could go back to your former self, or your time 20 years ago, when you didn't know all the things that were still to come 20 years hence, is there anything that you could give yourself if you could go back in time and give yourself a few notes? Hey, watch out for this. You could make this go faster by 5 years if you just get out ahead of this thing that you're not expecting right now.
Yeah, that's a good question. One of the things that we did not deal with leading up to the legislation here was assuring the local community that this was going to work out for the best, that this was going to be a great economic boon to the area, not a disastrous move that was going to take away more jobs. And this was in the wake of the spotted owl issue and injunction, Northwest Forest Plan, and so forth. And so kind of having to go back after federal legislation was passed and signed, and take the time to address the the very honest concerns that people in the local community had, people in the resource communities have about these things, so maybe that was one. Maybe all politics is local. I forget one of our famous. I think Senator Magnuson was, or maybe Scoop Jackson. I can't recall, but uh, realizing that even though this was a big national issue involving endangered species and national parks and tribal treaty rights, that doing the important work of getting local community, getting the inhabitants of these watersheds on board early on is something that I've taken to heart, and that's really influenced a lot of the efforts I'm working on now.
So what's it like on the rivers now, and what's coming back there? What's going on with nature there?
Well, it's the return of the salmon after the dams came out was remarkable in its rapidity and its dramatic flare. Within weeks after the lower dam was taken out, steelhead were swimming through, followed in a few months later that fall by coho, chinook, salmon. Going up on the Elwha River now in the fall when the chinook salmon are swimming back up is just breathtaking. This fall, my wife and I went to an old campground that we loved that is not there any longer, and there's changes in the landscape that I'll talk about here in a moment. But we visited the remains of a lovely old campsite and watched about 30 big chinook salmon spawning in this gravel spawning area channel alongside, right a little bend of the river. That was just phenomenal to see that, knowing that, for nearly 100 years, no fish were there. And many people head up the river to see this. Right now, it's a walk because as the river rewilded and as all that stadiums full of sediments and gravel behind the dams worked its way back downstream during the big floods, the river reclaimed some of its old channels and floodways, and the old road going up the Elwha Valley that accessed the Middle Valley to the dam side and to some trailheads was washed out several winters ago, patched intermittently with small bridges to allow some to allow motorized use of the valley again, and then washed out again. The campground I mentioned, the Altair campground, lovely little camp set of backcountry camps, was kind of pretty much washed away, and another larger campground, the Elwha campground, was flooded and now has a major channel of the river flying through it. The river really did reclaim the old floodplain, and in the process, moving gravel and logs around, creating new habitats, new spawning areas, new log jams. But it has, taken away some recreational opportunities. And so the Park Service is now in the midst of an environmental assessment to look at how to restore motorized access to the lower river, to allow people to get up to the old dam site, the Glines Canyon dam site, which is incredibly dramatic, big canyon with the dam missing, but the old floodgates were retained and are now an interpretive display with plaques and interpretation stories telling the story of dam removal and the restoration of the river and the reclamation of the spawning grounds by salmon. But it's created a little, another challenge certainly for land managers and a challenge for those of us who love the river. They're now looking at adding 6, 7, 8 miles onto our hikes just to get up to the old trailheads.
Probably one of the least worries, maybe for outsiders, would be the effects on the river for the national park, because it's already, the river's sick. It's not, salmon aren't spawning, and there are things missing from that crown jewel that a national park always represents, the best of the best. Mm. But now that there is spawning, now that the salmon are coming back, what kinds of edge effects of that are happening in the crown jewel? What was, or did it bring to light anything that was sick that you guys didn't even know about? Because now it's got its salmon back. Bears are taking them out into the woods. What
Mm-hmm.
what kinds of good things have happened that you guys might not have even expected to see?
Well, interestingly, there had been quite a bit of fairly recent research prior to the legislation. They showed the incredible diversity of wildlife species that depends on salmon that come up and spawn in the rivers. They're used by nearly 100 different wildlife species that take part in eating the spawn salmon, spreading the carcasses around the riparian areas, the forest areas. There's good studies showing marine-derived nutrients in the riverside trees, and the whole unity of the salmon cycle was pretty well understood. So that was, people were really excited about being able to document that, to see that, to measure it. And sure enough, those kinds of changes came, including most visibly and dramatically, eagles in the trees along the river where they were never before during spawning time, because there was nothing for them to eat. And river otters in the old reservoir sites fishing the riffles for returning salmon. Bears, of course, and raccoon and fisher and all the other animals, down to diminutive winter wrens that partake in the feast as the salmon go up and revitalize the forest ecosystem in the fall. What was unexpected was this incredible new delta as all this sediment, sands and gravels and cobbles moved down the stream. The beach at the river mouth, where the Elwha Tribe Reservation is, had been eroded to what we call just a shingle cobble beach, stones and rocks, and not much habitat for anything. Suddenly, within a couple of years, there's nearly 100 acres of new estuary and delta at the river mouth, which has brought in numerous aquatic plants, which have become the basis for forage fish, herring, and eulachon, and many other small feeder fish that come in and utilize this habitat, which then, of course, becomes utilized by salmon during their out migration into salt water. Gulls, eagles, Dungeness crab have returned to the river mouth. It's an incredible experience to walk out there and just see this incredibly rich, teeming delta full of life that just was not there before.
I'm looking at the image of the Seattle Times article, Elwha roaring back to life. Their lead image of that delta is amazing, and all I want is an image that's in the same aspect of what was obviously not there before, that it's like 100 acres. And I mean, all of the things that you're talking about, if you take the opposite view, it really gives a very clear picture of just how damaging dams are. I mean,
yeah, they're deaf to rivers. They really are. There's no question about it.
Well, rivers and I mean, and every single thing that depends on it. It took you a minute to get through that list, and you could go on. And of everything that's come back and everything that's been set right or is being set right again, and the unexpected things are so awesome. I remember that the first articles that were really exclamatory and just surprising, and it was everybody's surprised at how quickly the delta formed and all of that new land, just new land. You just don't see 100 new acres
much of that anymore.
Yeah, you don't see 100 new acres forming anywhere. I mean, that doesn't even happen in Hawaii with the eruptions. It takes an incredibly longer time. Well, so like, what's next? Are you being approached, or are people that you work with being approached to help out with other campaigns around the country? Because you guys are seasoned vets now. You are superheroes to those of us who are like, we're still staring at dams that, people have the same old attitude that they did back in the 70s, probably, when you guys started working on this stuff in the 80s. Where do we go from here? How can we take this rewilding lesson and put it on the road?
Well, what's interesting, I think, and something I've been noticing is our focus, my organization, Olympic Park Associates. I'm an old bioregionalist, and our focus is here, our ecosystem, our park, our national forest, public lands, larger ecosystem, coastal lands. But what I'm noticing is that the frequency with which the Snake River dams are now appearing in news stories and being discussed and looked at, tying into both the Puget Sound Chinook, which are on the endangered species list now, and the orca, the southern resident orca population, which is dependent on those Chinook, are both in a critical state. And there's government reports coming out now and news stories, and what could be done to help with the Chinook and recovery. And persistently, those Snake River dams are coming up as this could be a really, really important element in this whole restoration. And it's the same kind of I'm noticing it's the same kind of coverage as the Elwha started to get as the campaign was ramping up prior to the passage of the Elwha Restoration Act. And I think that perhaps with a different administration and a little bit different balance in the Senate, that could be really one of the next very large examples of a great restoration effort. And we know from the Elwha. Before the Elwha, we knew from Mount St. Helens, those rivers down there. The Toutle River was just blasted. It was flowing with hot cement, for God's sakes. And within 5-6 years, the salmon population were back up there. And it's just salmon and rivers are just incredible symbols of hope and vitality. And I think it's an idea whose time is really coming to the fore, both in terms of ecological restoration, rewilding, and just economics, getting rid of these pieces of junk that are getting ready to collapse and flood downstream, communities.
Anyway. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, when people started talking about that and the orca and and starting to make the requisite arguments about tourism dollars being far greater than any economic benefit that these little weak dying dams have in them. And I just considered it from that point on, because I was like, this is the land of the people who took down the Elwha dams. These dams are doomed. They are absolutely doomed. And
I think so. I think you're right.
My only question is, how much faster can we make that happen than the first one? Because that's always the thing. Is like, okay, everybody's wetted their whistle on this. They're kind of getting used to this. And you guys, I know, must be feeling your oats a little bit. Like the coalition of people that you put together for the Elwha is still there. And they're probably like, what else can we do? And they're probably already working on this, right?
Well, there are definitely people working on, I don't know if it's the exact coalition, but definitely people working on the Snake River dams. I think the problem is, what else can we do? There is a lot we have to do right now, just treading water to keep some of our basic environmental protections in place. But really it's the visionary restoration, rewilding, healing the earth, big campaigns and big issues that I think can inspire and excite people the most, and particularly young people. They really want to see something happening dramatic.
Well, an inspiration for people now who are beginning 30-year-long journeys of making something right, to maybe speak to that a little bit. Was it worth it? Your beard got gray. You probably have some stress related issues that you've had to deal with physically and mentally, and give us a little bit of a energy on that, because there are a lot of people who are starting big long battles, and they need to know it's worth it. I know it was worth it, but in your own.
Absolutely. And it's interesting. It comes down to you have the large vision, the large issue in mind. The goal is out there, but getting there is often getting to this next meeting, going to this public hearing, writing a letter again to this agency, continuing to meet with, with people, raising money for legal challenges. It's the kind of the day-to-day grind, and to me, it's always a matter of keeping the larger vision. Restoring the Elwha River, taking down the Snake River dams, bringing wolves back to the Olympic Peninsula, Olympic National Park. These kind of what become, as I realize, sort of lifetime goals that one just has to keep a measured pace of moving forward through all the small stuff to get there.
And we get greedy because we have these little minuscule short lives, human beings. And, the earth thinks not at all in these little microseconds of its history and wildlife and everything else. So, but we get greedy because we're like, well, I've got this life. And in this life, I want to see some really big things. I want to make the biggest of things happen, especially when people start
to celebrate them and enjoy the aftermath.
Yeah. So, but I mean, I think people are starting to realize these days that, we're connected to things, talking to Dave Foreman, you get connected all the way back to Bob Marshall and Aldo Leopold. Right, yeah. And you have to respect that. And you have to be okay with not sitting right next to Leopold or sitting right next to Edward Abbey. You have to be okay because there is a lineage and there is a connection back to those great ones that had come before us and did so much to pave the way. Otherwise, our road would be even harder than it was.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. No, that's the case. I was really lucky to be to come to the Northwest at a time when some of the really great mentors of mine, people who worked on passage of the Wilderness Act, people who were around for the creation of North Cascades National Park, and Polly Dyer and Pat Goldsworthy and Phil and Laura Zaleski and these people who work side by side with Sennheiser and getting the Wilderness Bill passed. And the Dyers worked with Dave Brower from way back when to get the first Sierra Club chapter up here established. And one of the things I learned from those folks early on was that things take time. I remember we had a kind of a disastrous governor elected here after a real visionary guy, Dan Evans, for whom the Olympic National Park Wilderness is now named in honor of his conservation accomplishments. We had Dixie Lee Ray, who was Nixon's head of the Atomic Energy Commission, elected as governor, and I was just crestfallen. And the next time we got together with Polly and everyone at our next board meeting, they said, "Well, we're going to just have to focus on what we can get done in the interim and wait for the next election and get a new governor." I thought, that's 4 6 years. My God, this is
Yeah.
But really, it was the perspective of age, of having been around, having seen some battles and some campaigns through to the end, and realizing that it's a long haul, and you gotta stay up for it, which I've tried to do.
And you have done, and I want to congratulate you. I know that, but probably doesn't ever get old. But it's not like you've never heard it in the last couple of years. But thank you so much for all the work that you've done, and thank everyone for me that you meet after today and say I was
happy to. Yeah.
Just go around thanking everybody because, I mean, everything is local. I get that, but there are a huge audience, including people like me, watching this from afar and being so proud of you guys and so amazed at what people can do to right the wrongs of the past. And this is always going to be, I mean, talk about a legacy. Congratulations.
Well, thank you. And I have to say, I have to share that with literally hundreds of people who worked hard on this, and most notably, including the members of the Elwha Clallam tribe, who never gave up hope for 100 years. And it couldn't have happened without them, and without everyone that made it happen, including some senators from the East Coast and supporters of rewilding nationwide. So it's really grateful to have been part of this one. But I'm just looking ahead to what's next.
And I want to have you back on Rewilding Earth to find out what you find out. What's next? Because we only touched the tip of the iceberg. We're talking about an area that has many, many more issues, many things, and beautiful things to talk about as well. So I would love to have you back and pick your brain once again, or maybe twice
Love
or
to
three
join you
times.
again, Jack.
Okay. Thank you, Tim.
You bet.
Thanks for listening to the Rewilding Earth podcast. Be sure to visit rewilding.org to subscribe so you don't miss past and future episodes. And while you're there, please consider supporting Rewilding by making a donation or subscribing to the Rewilding Earth newsletter.